Penn State has the second best odds to make the national championship game, and that's not surprising because they should.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Yes, this Penn State football team is a serious contender for the national championship. That's why they have the second best odds to not only get there, but they can absolutely win the college football playoff in the first 12-team iteration. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section because I am here to tell you why I like Penn State as a serious title contender. And it's not just because I'm a Penn State podcast host. No, they answered a lot of questions for me in that game against Oregon. The biggest question marks showed improvement against an elite team. An elite team in Oregon. No, this against Maryland, against any of the other weaker competition, that's one thing. But the offensive line, the running backs, Penn State's offense has been able to move along quite nicely, but it's the offensive line that's going to be able to really make a difference here down the stretch. You got to keep Drew Allar upright. You got to be able to create lanes for Nicholas Singleton and KJ Allen, because look what happens when the offensive line does its job and does its job effectively. This group has not been challenged all season, okay? The biggest obstacle they had was Ohio State, and they struggled a bit. But all the other performances against weaker front sevens, it was okay. Sometimes it was above average, but it really wasn't that impressive. And then to go out against an elite front seven, Oregon's linebackers are good, but that front four especially, any of the defensive ends, the starters, Mateo Uiagalelei, Jordan Burch coming back from injury, and then guys like Harmon in the middle. I mean, that is a solid Oregon front four, and Penn State's offensive line arguably had its best performance of the season in the Big Ten championship game against the best group, the best counterparts that they faced all season, and you saw it as a result. The running game benefited a lot. Nicholas Singleton and KJ Allen both had over 100 yards. It almost seems forgettable when the last time that happened, and it came against a really good team. And then the passing game benefited because of it. Wide receivers. The more time Drew Allar has the chance to sit back in the pocket, the more time that wide receivers are able to break in and out of their routes, those guys are going to be more likely to get open. So the offensive line is the key to a lot of things. Not only just keeping Allar protected, but it helps across that. That's why football coaches, I will reiterate what they say every single time I can. The offensive line games are won and lost in the trenches. That's why football coaches say it for that exact reason. And Drew Shelton, Nolan Rucci, especially with the Anthony Donko injury, how is he going to respond as the full-time starter? And he is not a questionable liability anymore. No, he can be someone that can anchor the right side for this Penn State team. They also have Cooper Cousins and JB Nelson as some added depth. So this offensive line goes from a question mark to potentially a clear-cut strength for the Nittany Lions. And like I said, everything benefits because of it. Nicholas Singleton is back and fully healthy. We saw a reemergence of KJ Allen, if you will. Sometimes the best defense is a great offense. So I want to talk about that coming up here just in a second, about how I'm not going to put too much stock into Penn State's defense performing the way it did against Oregon. But Penn State's offense clearly will not be an issue here. Well, they don't have any wide receivers. How are they going to play in the Penn State just put up 37 points against Oregon, the number one team in the country, without any of those wide receivers. As you mentioned, they still have Trey Wallace, just to let everybody know. But if you think Penn State's biggest problems are because, well, they don't have any wide receivers, I'd like to point out that they scored 37 points in that championship game against Oregon. Now, I'm not putting too much stock into Penn State's defensive performance, allowing quite a bit of points to an elite offense. Okay? Shocker. Oregon's offense can score. Print it everywhere for the headlines. No, don't get me wrong. Because I walk away from that game and I say, all right, the defensive line didn't have that great of a game. Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Sutton, guys that I was expecting to, if anything was going to wreck Oregon's game plan, it was going to be those three. And for the most part, they were ineffective. And as a result, the secondary suffered because across the board, they had a bad game outside of AJ Harris. Anybody not named AJ Harris had a bad game in the secondary. So that's Jalen Kimber. Davian Collins didn't play enough to say, okay, good or bad, impactful game, right? I think he did his job, and that's fair. You need that sometimes. But I look at Zion Tracy and Cam Miller and even Jalen Reed and Zach Wheatley to an extent. They all struggled in pass coverage outside of AJ Harris, who practically played a perfect game. And that's an important part of this too. I'm going to get to names like AJ Harris and others in another second here. I think you can scheme around this though. Penn State, this isn't a sign of things to come. I think this is a one-off event because you can scheme around questionable coverage. Tom Allen's going to learn his lesson. You can have blitzes. You can create different exotic zones. And that was the key to those Ohio State and Oregon games. What can you craft? What can you create? Something that hasn't been on film, that where you can maximize the ability of your defensive players. That's where the coordinator comes in here. Now, talent does matter. And Oregon had talent in spots where Penn State is weak, i.e. the slot receiver. So Penn State's got to find a way to, if you do run into another opponent that has that kind of slot receiver, that kind of elite playmaker, Penn State will definitely, it knows now what to do against that kind of offense. And they have the extra week to work on things. Remember, this is a bye week going into the weekend against SMU, but it's also to look long-term that you can maybe install a couple of things or perfect and tweak some things that weren't exactly working throughout the season, or now that you can take a risk on because they're going to give you a bigger reward. You can't exactly scheme away from a bad offensive line. I think you can cover things up in coverage with, like I said, blitzes and zones. But Penn State has too much talent to let something like that happen again, where they surrender 45 points. And if they see Oregon again in that championship game, it very well might be another shootout here. But like I said, a one-off event. You have Abdul Carter, you have Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Kobe King, Jalen Reed, AJ Harris, who is turning into that elite cornerback for them. All in real time. These guys are NFL caliber players. So that's what gives me the reassurance that defensively, it's not going to be an ongoing issue because you have so much talent. All of these guys are available for the most part. They're as close to 100% as possible. All of these guys have had outstanding seasons, and they can influence games. Now, I'm not saying that any of the other guys that I didn't name can't come up big. Tony Rojas certainly has that capability, a Devon J. Thomas, if you will. I mean, look, Dom DeLuca had a pretty good game in the Big Ten Championship for what it's worth, despite the loss. But point being that Penn State has too much on defense for it to be a consistent liability. Then, in order for them to get to the championship, they have the favorable path. And yes, playing against SMU, you're going to be what? They opened up as an 8-point favorite. Now it's pushing to 9, maybe 10 points, right? And you also have the chance to meet a Boise State if and when you beat SMU at home. So yes, that's a favorable path, but then Penn State's making it a favorable path. Because Penn State's the better team than SMU. Penn State's the better team than Boise State. And honestly, I won't go to say that it's a favorable matchup with any of the future opponents down the road in that semifinal, but Notre Dame, Georgia, and Indiana, those are teams that won't overwhelm Penn State. And it's not because Penn State's lucky, it's because Penn State's put itself in a position to win against teams like that. It helps that you avoid the two teams that beat you, Oregon and Ohio State. But Penn State doesn't have these severe mismatches against the likes of any of them, Notre Dame, Georgia, and Indiana. Like I said, I will say that Penn State's biggest weakness is that high-powered offense, but particularly with multiple elite receiving options. Georgia does not have that. Indiana does not have that. Notre Dame does not have that. And yes, SMU and Boise State do not have that. Ohio State and Oregon do, and so does Texas here. Even still, Penn State should not be afraid of those three teams. Penn State should not, because those were one-score games. Let's not pretend and act like, oh, Ohio State won so convincingly. Oregon won so convincingly. Oregon had an 18-point lead, but Penn State erased that. And it was in a position to tie the game, and who knows what would have happened if they went for two again, got it to overtime. Who knows? The fact it was a one-score game, Penn State was absolutely in those contests. They did not bow out. So all it takes is one lucky bounce or one break to go in your favor, and Penn State wins those games. So any of these opponents that are in the college football playoff, It's not that they are overwhelmingly better than Penn State. Penn State is in any of these games, even if they are a 2-point or a 3-point underdog. Penn State could also get some reinforcements back. This is where we will finish. And then we'll talk about the transfer portal next. Getting some reinforcements back. Keon Wiley and Caden Saunders have been practicing for what? It feels like over a month, maybe 6 weeks. Linebacker, wide receiver, that depth is important going into the postseason. If you can get anything from those two guys, and Wiley was supposed to be a breakout player, I'm watching those two names to potentially help Penn State for this playoff run here. We'll also talk about KJ Winston, who's not going to be available. He's confirmed out for the postseason. But the transfer portal, it is not the highest priority for Penn State this offseason. It's not a hot take. We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on incredible seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And yes, we are looking at tickets for that first round of the college football playoff. Penn State hosting SMU Saturday, December 21st at noon. You can go to the Game Time app or go to gametime.co, and I have that pulled up on my browser here, and the top deals, the Game Time picks, are listed for me. You can get a super deal. Lower end zone, south side of the stadium, section SK row 25, all in pricing, so no surprise fees at checkout. $234 for each ticket for a playoff game. If you're looking for the lowest price on Game Time, south side of the stadium again, section SDU row 75, this is upper end zone, $108 per ticket. Again, all in pricing, so no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And today's episode is also brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Football fans, the playoffs are nearly here. Bowl season is almost here, and that means one thing: college football has never been better than ever. And to make sure you're ready, we partnered with Home Field, the exclusive apparel sponsor of our show, to bring you their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. Home Field is the go-to for premium collegiate apparel crafted with comfort in mind and featuring vintage designs that will make you the envy of any tailgate. And believe me, the second I saw that Home Field apparel for Penn State, I wanted some, and I got me some. With over 180 schools to choose from, including Penn State, there's something for every fan, not just football, basketball, wrestling, hockey. But the real MVP is the Home Field Platinum Football Box. This is your all-access pass to exclusive gear for the 2024 season with 3 never-before-seen items from your school. Plus, VIPs will get even more. You'll get a special hat and the 2024 Platinum Pass for early access and discounts all season long. So don't wait. Head over to homefieldapparel.com and gear up today and use our promo code WEARE24. That is WEARE24. That gets you 15% off at checkout. Again, that's over at homefieldapparel.com. WEARE24 is your promo code. That's Home Field. Let's make this season unforgettable. Yes, it's bowl season. Yes, it's playoff season. But of course, it's also transfer portal season. And Penn State's got to make a splash, right? They got to land an elite player out of the portal. Honestly, Penn State has more important things to do. I talked about that originally in the portal primer. If you missed that, I can link that in the description for everybody. But I think Penn State has bigger priorities than going into the portal. Now, don't get me wrong, an elite wide receiver would be nice. Penn State absolutely would need that for the 2025 season, but I think retaining the NFL caliber players that they have that are fringe on going into the draft versus returning, that is more important than finding those portal replacements. Let's talk about it here, because Penn State has a top 10 NIL collective that's raised $13.5 million. So there's not as many excuses here. They are legitimate when it comes to making bids for these players. But you also have to think about what you can keep in-house here. I would rather see Penn State make a concerted effort to retain guys like, Drew Allar, Nicholas Singleton. On defense, Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Sutton, Kobe King, Jalen Reed, Zachary Wheatley. We're going to talk about Kalen King. We're going to talk about KJ Winston in the final segment here. But these guys could join KJ Winston because they have an NFL draftable profile Jury's still out on who's a first-round pick, who's not, outside of Abdul Carter, and I'd make my arguments for Drew Allar as well. But if you can be strategic with your NIL, if you're Penn State, I would rather Penn State, and Penn State would want to rather keep this group of players that are all NFL caliber, regardless of where they're selected. They are going to play in the pros. They are going to be on an NFL franchise. But that's better to keep them, retain them, and keep the consistency rather than going outside of the program and finding guys that could be as good as them, maybe, possibly. You don't know. You know what you're getting. And those guys are going to get better. You know that you're going to get back a better version of Drew Allar, Nicholas Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have to name everybody on this list. Now, don't get me wrong. They have needs, and those needs are expensive needs. After quarterback, wide receiver and defensive line, particularly defensive tackle, get expensive. But if you keep these players, if you keep a Zane Durant, if you keep Denai Dennis Sutton, you don't have to be as desperate in the portal, if you will. You don't have to get into these bidding wars, but that's what Penn State will have to do. I'm going to steal this one from Brian Smith. Unfortunately, not as frequent of a guest as I would like him to be, but always value his conversations when we get to talk about recruiting in the portal. And he said this: the reason Georgia is a contender every year is because of its dominance in the trenches defensively. Meaning that if you want an impact defensive tackle that can take over games, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. It is going to cost you a significant NIL investment. You have to pay for a serious contributor. And Penn State could have major depth issues at defensive line. And that's why I say spend what it takes to get Zane Durant and Denai Dennis Sutton back on your team. Find a way to keep them happy and not say, you know what, I'm going to take that chance on the NFL. How about they boost the NFL draft stock and make some NIL money on the side, because they're already losing Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter is going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft next season. You can't talk him out of that unless you want to pay him, tens of millions of dollars in NIL? Okay, good luck with that. No program is doing that, let's be honest. Devon J. Thomas, Smith Vilbert. So you're losing key veteran guys. You're going to get Amin Vanover back. Alonzo Ford can come back. I'm actually a little confused about that because he's listed as a redshirt senior with an asterisk next to him on his Go PSU Sports profile. But I think because of the COVID season, Old Dominion did not play any football whatsoever. He actually has one more year of eligibility, which is huge for Penn State because Alonzo Ford was coming on so strong over the course of the season and was playing to the level of Zane Durant. But now he's not healthy anymore. We don't know what injury he's recovering from. It could be that Achilles injury that he's dealt with before in the past, but regardless, Ford is going to be recovering from an injury. It's at least something, and it's a good something that he's returning, but you still got to wait for him. And then how long is it going to be until he's 100% and back to full game speed? So getting two impact players like Denai Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant, and you would get better versions of them back. That's not just about depth. Those are two starting future NFL caliber players. If you can find a way to retain them, I think that helps out Penn State, and then you don't have to go into the portal for a defensive lineman. Let's talk about wide receivers. It's always going to be the elephant in the room. A number one wide receiver would be great and all, but Penn State is going to be an uphill battle for this spot. And let's go back to my point that I made in the first segment. Penn State isn't having issues scoring the football. Well, they don't have any wide receivers, Zach. As much of a luxury as it would be to get that elite playmaker, I do miss the days of a KJ Hamler and a Jahan Dotson, Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, man. But Tyler Warren kind of carries that workload, right? He is the biggest part of the passing offense, so you don't exactly need an elite wide receiver to make your offense go. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Tyler Warren, and Drew Allar do a good enough job as it is being those weapons within the offense. As much as people are going to say it is a need, it's a priority, I say it's more of a want. It should be a priority. It should be a prioritized want because it is a luxury. And that doesn't mean that it will happen just because people are going to say it's a need. Part of it has to do with the design of the offense. Andy Kotelnicki is a run-first offensive coordinator. Now, that doesn't mean he's never going to pass the football because, look, Penn State's won through the air. Penn State's won games on the ground. He will do whatever it takes. But the design of the offense is to be run first. They're going to have two running backs And that's going to look different. Is that Singleton and Allar? Is eventually a Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, right? I hope people are understanding my point. Is that Penn State always cycles between a running back 1A and a 1B. And then look at the usage of tight ends in the offense. Tyler Warren's going to be gone. You got to find a way to replace that production. But, guess who's waiting? Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, potentially Andrew Rapplier. What if one of the freshman tight ends that they're bringing in, 3 true freshmen, what if any of those guys end up breaking out early, right? So there are a lot of other assets in the offense that you can get creative with. You don't have to take this deep dive to go into the portal to get an elite wide receiver because you do have other elite playmakers, just not at the wide receiver position. Part of it is the design of the offense. And then what if Drew Allar goes into the pros? What if he goes into the draft? Bo Prabula is a running quarterback. So now you're taking away reps opportunities from a pass catcher. The design of the offense, the makeup of the offense is not going to be attractive to wide receivers. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Guys who want the football, they're not going to get the football that much. Part of it also has to do with competitive NIL. Is Penn State willing, with the other assets that it has, to pay somebody, an elite wide receiver, and I'm talking elite, $1 to $2 million. That's what it costs. Expect at least north of $500,000. Probably not, because they're already missing on guys like KC Concepcion. He released, I think it was a top 5 or a top 6, the NC State, former NC State wide receiver, and Penn State was at least one of his desirable destinations. That's completely over with, and it's because I don't think Penn State is prepared to pay $1 million or more to an elite wide receiver like that, because they got to take care of the players that they have in-house while going to find some other complementary pieces. Penn State has a clear plan for the portal, and it's similar to recruiting. Guys who are those diamonds in the rough, if you will. Insane potential if you get it right, but they still need time to develop. Rarely do you see Penn State go get that top tier instant impact player like an Arnold Ebiketie. That's really the only one that comes to mind. Guys like Mitchell Tinsley, Davian Collins, Nolan Rucci, Alonzo Ford, that take their time, but eventually reach that threshold. And honestly, even before the portal era, Jaquan Brisker and Jair Brown. So Penn State, they go and get complementary pieces to the team that eventually explode and turn into those elite playmakers. Penn State plays the long game, and it's not going to change. It's not going to change. They will use the portal to find those complementary players more often than not. I'm not saying they won't try. I'm not saying they can't try. However, don't be surprised if nothing huge happens this portal cycle and for future portal cycles as well. KJ Winston opts for the NFL draft. He should have come back, but I agree with his decision. I'll tell you about it more after a word from our sponsors. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the action going in the NFL with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5. $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And if we look over at FanDuel.com, we can see the lines for Penn State versus SMU. Saturday, December 21st, Penn State is an 8.5-point favorite, minus 315 on the money line if you're thinking SMU, plus 250. The total is set at 53.5. And if you want full college football playoff championship odds, Penn State is plus 550. If you like any of those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. Remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. KJ Winston will forego his remaining eligibility and enter the 2025 NFL Draft. This is something that I'm not surprised at based on the discourse that we have. Now, don't get me wrong, in the age of NIL, was there a chance to potentially retain Winston? Yes, there was. However, it was unlikely. I think I said 5 to 10% maybe, just based on the way everything had happened. But it is official. And while I don't agree with it from the standpoint, it doesn't benefit Penn State. It benefits KJ Winston. I don't disagree with KJ Winston's decision to go into the NFL Draft. And it's for a variety of things here. So it has to deal with the specifics of the injury. he had a partial tear in his ACL. That was confirmed by Adam Schefter, and he had the procedure, and he's actually going to be cleared for to resume on-field activities March 1st by the time of the NFL Combine, some pro days and everything. Why I say that KJ Winston's decision is best for him is because at the end of the day, he is probably going to be making more money as a third, fourth, fifth round NFL draft pick based on the way that rookie contracts are structured. He's going to make about $1.5 million. And was Penn State prepared to offer an $1 million NIL deal to Winston? Maybe they were, but you still can't compete with the prospects of the NFL. And that's why the draft is still appealing to an extent, unless you absolutely make it worth the player's while for them to come back. You should point to Tyler Warren. You should point to Jahan Dotson as those examples of what happens when you return for a college season and then you can boost your NFL draft stock. Those are prime examples there. I don't really necessarily like saying, oh, look at Kalen King, look at Curtis Jacobs. They are 7th round, undrafted. No. Point to the positive examples. I don't like negative recruiting. That's essentially what it is, negative recruiting. Because that didn't work out for them. But who's to say that KJ Winston, with the right conversations and maybe shows some capability at his pro day and everything, that he's okay, that he's recovered here. It also gets him closer to that second NFL contract. I think this wasn't my point that was brought up. This was a response to one of my posts when I said, hey, look, KJ Winston, what he's doing makes a lot of sense here, even though it would help Penn State out immensely for the 2025 season. I can't fault Winston here. And he said, well, it actually makes sense because he gets closer to that second NFL contract. It just starts the clock early for Winston because you're not making second NFL, and that's if everything works out. So he's betting on himself, as the saying goes here. The whole timeline of Winston's injury is just unfortunate. I compare his career to Micah Parsons because we never got to see the best of either of those players. Entirely different circumstances, right? The COVID season and him opting out, focusing on the draft, but similar results in the fact of you have a superstar caliber player. Penn State doesn't get to utilize him to the fullest of his abilities, and Nittany Lion fans only get to appreciate Parsons and Winston for that one season where it was their breakout, but not their signature season. Nobody ever got to see their signature season, and their legacies suffer because of it. Should have been greater. Again, unfortunate circumstances, a pandemic, and an ACL partial tear. Now, the ACL partial tear, I have some thoughts about that too, because KJ Winston could have come back and played this season in 2024. I did hear that rumor a bit, but now it makes sense why that was out there, because he didn't have to have the surgery. He opted to have the surgery and clearly had the plan in mind to go into the NFL draft once this happened. I don't fault him for doing that, because what happens... Okay, so no, he's not going to be 100%, but he would have to play through some discomfort and he would at least be available. I would take an injured KJ Winston over no KJ Winston at all in Penn State's defense. That's my point. Winston, though, what happens if it is a fluke play and then a partial ACL tear becomes a full ACL tear, and then you jeopardize the start of your NFL career because now you have that procedure, give or take September, right? Whenever it actually happened, October. And now you're recovering for March, the combine, and everything else. A fluke play happens late in the season against a Minnesota, Maryland, maybe it's the Big Ten championship when you don't have a fully healthy knee, and then you injure it there, and then you really jeopardize your NFL prospects. KJ Winston is going off of the fact that he believes that he is a second, third. I think it is realistic to think that he goes in the third, fourth, or fifth round based on what he showed his sophomore season. Never missed a tackle. He clearly had superstar abilities, but he will have to prove to NFL franchises that he is recovering from his injury. A lot of potential, and NFL franchises will take a chance on him just on potential alone in one of maybe a third round pick, definitely a day 3 pick. He's not going to go undrafted. I can guarantee you that much. It hurts Penn State. Can't blame KJ Winston for doing what he did. Because I think Penn State can be a 2025 contender as well. I think they can be a title contender in 25, and Winston would have helped with that. Now you got to refocus your resources to seeing, hey, let's get Jalen Reed and Zach Wheatley to come back and play another season for Penn State. Lot covered here in this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for checking out this edition. That's going to do it for me here. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Please leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family, and if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to talk so much about Penn State and SMU in the upcoming week as the playoffs are finally here.